It finally happened. After years and years of waiting, we got a new raid in old school RuneScape, the Tombs of Amascut, and with it, plenty of shiny new best in slot rewards. If you guys know me, you know the drill, and if you don't, it usually goes like this. I spend tons of my own hard-earned GP to buy and test an item on day of release, and then inevitably lose hundreds of millions of gold selling it back. But it's worth it, because content. Today I want to try and buy myself the new one-handed stab weapon, Osmumten's Fang. This weapon sports some insanely high accuracy, as well as some interesting passive effects that make it incredibly strong against high defense targets. First of all, it rolls accuracy 2 times, and the higher roll is what gets taken, kind of like having advantage in D&D, which already gives it an insanely high accuracy over other weapons. The second passive effect is that it doesn't actually roll its damage like other weapons either. It uses this formula, which basically means that any successful hit that passes an accuracy check will never hit a 0, but will only do at maximum 85% of the weapon's true max hit. It's a little confusing, but it basically means it has a lower max hit at the cost of pretty much never hitting zeros unless you miss the accuracy check entirely. Osmumten's Fang also has a special attack called Eviscerate that takes 25% of the special attack energy, provides 50% increased accuracy to the next attack, as well as using the Fang's true max hit, meaning not the 85% damage cap, on that particular roll. So it can actually hit a little bit higher and a bit more accurately at the cost of only 25% spec, which is pretty decent. Now, originally I was actually trying to buy the Tumakin's Shadow for absolute max cash, but I had this offer in the entire first day of release as well as overnight, and it seems like it's just not selling. This was actually the night before I went to bed after day 1, and I was pretty surprised to see it hadn't even touched the Grand Exchange yet. So it was still going for well over max cash, and I decided to try out some other stuff first while I waited for it to become more available. That being said, all the other rewards are still also very expensive, and I expect to lose a decent bit of money still. So if you enjoy content like this, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. It'll help ease my pain about losing probably hundreds of millions of GP. Alright, the first thing I want to buy is the Fang. I have no idea if this thing is even any good, but let's go ahead and try it out at a few places and just see if it's worth using or worth buying. Don't look at these, that's for the next video. But look at that, the Fang bought 550. I think it's a little more expensive than what it's actually going for right now, but yeah, I'll take it. So what's the first thing you do? Of course, when you buy a new weapon, you go to your POH, you set up the combat dummy, and you see what the max hits are. Now, I am using max strength, Infernal Cave, full Torva, and everything here, so let's compare the Rapier max hit, which is a 45 without Piety, and a 55 with Piety, to the Osmumten's Fang, which is a 41 without Piety, and a 50 with it. And you might be thinking, well, that's pretty weird. Why does the Rapier have a higher max hit? And it's because of what I mentioned earlier about the Osmumten's Fang and how it actually works. Now, if we use the special attack, the Osmumten's Fang can actually hit a 58, which is its true max hit. Basically, what I'm saying is, this thing isn't actually going to be out DPSing the Rapier in situations where a decent accuracy weapon or a basically no accuracy check is required. It's going to be primarily better in situations where you need to roll high against something's defense. But in this video, we'll visit a few of those places and a few low defense ones as well, just so you guys can see the comparison yourselves against actual NPCs. Now, the first and most obvious place that I want to test this is actually in Tombs of Amascut. So let's go ahead and gear up and head over there. I've never done one on my main, but I've done like 5 or something solos on day 1 on my iron, so it shouldn't be too bad. There are 2 main bosses in TOA that I really wanted to try this weapon out on, and the first one was Kefri. Now, Kefri is already being killed by rapiers and things like that, so I figured, why not try the Osmumten's Fang here, and it should be incredibly accurate. And to no surprise, it was. It was hitting basically every single time. In fact, I think throughout the entire fight, I only hit 1 or 2 zeros, which is really, really good. But one thing you guys might have picked up on if you've been paying attention to the screenshots or are paying attention to the background footage right now, the weapon is not a 4-tick weapon like the Rapier, like the Whip, and most other melee weapons. It's actually a 5-tick, which makes a pretty sizable difference. And even though the Fang is actually incredibly impressive, even on the ads that have notoriously high defense that spawn in the midst of this encounter, I would say that a Rapier is probably still better here. I haven't had a chance or obtained the new jewels to try with the Karis Partisan, though I imagine those are probably going to end up being the meta. This might be better at certain times at this boss if maybe you're on a much, much higher attunement level than me. I was only doing these solos on 160, which is just barely dipping into normal mode because right now, that's what most people are still doing. There's a few people doing expert and maybe it'll be better for them, but I don't think the average player is going to be there, at least not for a while. And the other boss that I really wanted to try this out on was Babbe. Now, Babbe's pretty notorious for having incredibly high defense, but as you can see, that does not matter to the Fang because it just rips straight through it. Also, please do not judge the fact that I'm using crystal. It's what I'm used to using on my iron because I don't have a T-bow, so I just used it for this raid. But as you can see, I'm hitting pretty much no zeros on this whatsoever, and this is the perfect demonstration of having an NPC with very, very high defense is going to be the perfect target for this weapon. In fact, throughout the entire fight, I did basically next to no zeros against Babbe while using the Fang. And this is one of those situations where I can see it having a niche use here. However, when you get to the end bosses, it becomes a little bit more frustrating. Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, but at this point in the Guardians fight, it puts out its little weak core, and you will always hit with your max hit with melee and magic. I don't think it maxes with range, but that's besides the point. This weapon being a 5-tick here is actually very, very bad. It has a lower max hit than the rapier unless you're using the special, and because of the slower attack speed, it actually takes 4 cycles to get through this phase instead of 3 or 2 if you're using a bunch of special attack energy. So it's probably not worth replacing the rapier with this, but it's supposed to be used in tandem with it. I did try using the Fang for the final phase of the boss fight as well, and again, while it really doesn't hit a lot of zeros, it really doesn't hit a lot of particularly high numbers either, and I ended up switching back to my Bofa just because it felt like it was doing a lot more damage, especially due to the faster attack speed. The next place I want to test the Fang is actually over at Bandos. Now, I know a lot of people outside of Bodhi don't really do melee Bandos that often, but Bandos does still have pretty high defense, so I think the Fang might be decent here. I'm not too experienced with melee Bandos, but I'm mostly just seeing if this is accurate enough to be maybe worth replacing the existing options. Now, it's pretty hard because you're comparing it to things like the Scythe, but let's give it a shot. I guess let's just go ahead and give this a shot. I guess we're just trying to see how little it misses. Right off the rip, we're hitting. Every spec is hitting. Not a single zero so far. Probably should have brought something to actually kill the minions with, huh? That might have been a decent idea. All right, so there's still a couple zeros, which is actually pretty surprising. I mean, granted, it's not Warhammered or anything, so it still does have pretty high defense over here at Grodor, but it's hitting more than you would normally hit with pretty much any other weapon. Regardless, though, seeing zeros on a weapon that has just this high accuracy is a little bit weird, and I'm getting just absolutely dumpstered here because I never melee Bandos, as you can tell by my tile markers. Ow. I don't know, I gotta say that it didn't feel amazing. It felt kind of meh, just like everywhere else. There's a few instances that I can think of where this thing is going to be absolutely busted, and we'll get to those in just a minute. Now again, there are a lot of better methods to do Bandos than meleeing, unless you're exceptionally good at prayer flicking. Most people choose to use full crystal and a Bofa these days and just kite it around the room. But this weapon did decently. It's not awful here, but obviously you're not really going to be buying it just for Bandos, unless maybe you're doloing and have a bunch of alts that need high accuracy. Something here that I really want to try this on, and that's actually challenge mode Tecton. Now, there's quite a few bosses in raids where this is going to be a pretty decent weapon. Again, like I mentioned, the point of the Fang isn't necessarily to be better than the Rapier in terms of raw DPS against low defense targets, but it's to be accurate against high defense targets where you'd be missing a lot otherwise. Surprisingly, it actually does hit. Not particularly high so far, but it is hitting, which is worth mentioning, I guess. Alright, there's a couple zeros here and there, but I mean, it's fucking CM Tecton. I don't know what you're expecting. It's not necessarily about this particular weapon being best in slotted Tecton, though I do think it'd be a bit easier to obtain than something like a Scythe or an Inquisitor's Mace, but I guess we'd have to wait until we have confirmed drop rates to prove that. It's just that this weapon is incredibly accurate, and a lot of things, especially in challenge mode raids, do have very freakishly high boosted defense. There's a few other places in Chambers itself where the Osmumten's Fang will probably be pretty decent, and that's going to be things like Ice Demon, the ranged Vanguard, and probably also Vasa Crystals. It's decent on Tecton, but you're going to have a lot of other options. It could be a decent go-to as an Iron, though, because it kind of seems like TOA is pretty easy to solo, and who likes doing Nightmare for an Inquisitor's Mace? This is kind of a meme place that I want to test it out, but as it is a stab weapon, I want to try this out at Corp. Yeah, I am serious. I have 1 HP. I want to try this out at Corp. kind of a joke, but hey, maybe it'll end up being good. Now, I couldn't find anybody to do this in a group with me because TOA just came out and everyone's pretty excited to do that, but I imagine that a weapon like this, if it does end up getting used at Corp, is more likely to be used in small teams than it is in solos. And again, the reason for that is, when you're soloing Corp, you're lowering its defense to basically 0, so the 4-tick weapon alternative that's normally used, the Zamorakian Spear, is gonna be better DPS just for the attack speed alone. Now, in small teams, I could potentially see this being used. I'm not sure if it would end up being a meta. It really depends after people run a bunch of numbers and do a bunch of testing, people much smarter than me. But in small teams, you don't spend 10 minutes specking the boss down every time, and it still retains quite a bit of its incredibly high defense level. So the Fang would be able to cut through that, but in a normal solo scenario, I really can't see it being better than a Zamorakian Spear. Despite having very low health at the end here, normally that probably wouldn't happen either, and your essence is not the most fantastic drop in the world, as you're not going to be wearing Torva. This is definitely an option for Corp. The kill, though, was, again, noticeably slower than it was when I used a Zamorakian Spear on my Iron, and it's kind of obvious why. Again, attack speed is a massive difference. That being said, testing this at Corp was kind of a meme, so I didn't expect it to be better there, but I know I've seen a lot of people talking about it potentially replacing the Zami Spear. And while it might for small teams, which isn't something I have a whole lot of experience in, it definitely won't for Iron Men. The last place I want to try out this Fang is, surprise, surprise, Nex. Now, I know a lot of you guys might be thinking, melee Nex, that sounds ridiculous, but it's something that's fairly common for Iron Men to do, at least it has been when I was doing Nex recently, so it wouldn't really surprise me to see it get a lot of use here, especially considering the reason that a lot of people use the xeric crossbow here is, wait for it, it's a very accurate weapon. So being able to use a very accurate melee weapon could be pretty decent DPS. Well, unfortunately for me, TOA did just come out, so obviously everyone is kind of focusing on that, and I can't manage to find myself a small Nex team. So I'm gonna go ahead and just try this in the mass world and see if it actually works okay. Unfortunately, the difference in the mass world is there are so many people that it becomes a little bit better to just use things that are RNG based like xeric crossbow. This would definitely be substantially better in like a 3 to 5 man team, but let's try it out anyway. Spec hit, second spec hit. So far I have not hit a 0. That's actually pretty nuts. Okay, this is actually insanely accurate. Every single swing is hitting. Like, every single swing. That's crazy. And Nex has insanely high defense, too. So being able to hit every swing on Nex is kind of disgusting. There's another hit. Oh my god, it's insane. It's so strong. That was crazy good. Also just got like 17,000 things completed there. I'll come to the conclusion, this thing is amazing at Nex. Obviously, it's going to be pretty hard to snipe an MVP in a mass world against people who are just going to be spamming xeric crossbow specs and getting guaranteed 110 damage, but even with all of that, it's still performing incredibly well. And actually, I did get the MVP on that fight, in a mass world, with melee. That is pretty decent proof of how good this thing is, man. I didn't even bring or use Dragon Claws with me here. That MVP was just because of the Fang, and only the Fang. That's nuts. Alright, well, now it's the real moment of truth here, though. We bought the Fang for $550. Can we sell it for $550? I would be over the moon if it just sells for the same amount. I'll take the G tax, whatever. Does it sell for $550? Oh, we actually profited off of having this thing. It sold for $575, and we get $570 out of it. I actually profited 20 mil buying this. Normally when I make videos like this, I end up losing a lot of money, so this is actually pretty new. I'm making money trying something very early into release is not an experience I regularly have. But if you guys like videos like this, make sure you stay tuned because I, as you saw in the Grand Exchange, am currently trying to buy the full Masori armor set as well. And I'll be very happy if I can actually pick all that up and make a video testing that at a few places around the game. If you have any places that you want me to test other armors or weapons at, let me know. I probably will continue to try to buy the Tumikin's Shadow, but it's just in high demand right now, so I won't really be able to get it unless I blow like 4 billion coins.